Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for having me today along with you. I wanted to say I think that there are now 10 Republican candidates in the field, and there are 8 Democrats. 17 of them are not at all a worry to Osama bin Laden and what he represents. Dr. Paul, on the other hand, if there could be a press representative from Al-Qaeda today here, there surely would be. Dr. Paul has hit on exactly the only indispensable ally that Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and their allies have, and that's U.S. foreign policy. It is a patent absurdity on the part of the governing establishment in the United States to believe that the war we are engaged in at the moment has anything to do with our freedoms, our democracies, gender equality, or myself having a Budweiser after work in the evening. There's nothing more absurd than that you could imagine. This war has to do with our foreign policy and its impact in the Islamic world. That has nothing to do with judging the moral or monetary or political worth of our policies. It's simply to understand what motivates our enemy. Historically, I think most of us in this room are old enough to remember the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran trying for a decade to instigate a jihad against the United States on the basis of our degeneracy and our debauchery, our movies, our women in the workplace. And it didn't work. No one blew themselves up because of R-rated movies. Even when the Marines were attacked in Lebanon, they were attacked because they were on Lebanese turf, not because they were representative of American freedoms in primary elections. Al-Qaeda and its like have gone to school on the abject failure of the Ayatollah. They have focused on U.S. foreign policy, and they have found it to be a glue of cohesion, a glue of unity across the Islamic world, which is, as every other civilization on earth, as diverse, as fractious as can be imagined. Ethnically, linguistically, divisions between sects and within sects of religion. There's no Islam, there is no Muslims, there is just an Islamic world. And the cohesion that bin Laden has given it stems from the impact of our policies. Simply 6 in number. Our ability, until recently at least, to control the price of oil and make it acceptable to Western consumers. Our unqualified support for Israel. Our presence on the Arabian Peninsula. Our military presence in Muslim countries, particularly places like Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but now including Iraq and Afghanistan. Our support for governments that are viewed across the Islamic world as oppressing Muslims, Russia and Chechnya and the North Caucasus, India and Kashmir, the genocide by inundation by the Chinese in Western China, and perhaps most painfully of all for America, is our 50 years of support for Arab police states and tyrannies. There is, within the movement of Al-Qaeda and the Islamists, a large measure of liberation sentiment. Muslims, especially in the Arab world, have been governed by dictators, coup-installed generals, and absolute monarchs since World War II, and we have supported, nurtured, and protected them. So that's about what I have to say. I think it's very common for the slurs to be thrown when you say something like this. You're a Bush hater, you're an anti-Semite, you're an appeaser, you're an anti-American. I think it's a shame, but the governing establishment wants to protect itself. It does not want to talk about these issues. It does not want to talk about our dependence on energy from foreign countries 35 years after the first embargo against the United States. So I would leave it there. I think Dr. Paul has done a tremendous service to the American people. The debate on this is the important thing. At the end of the debate, Americans may decide that the foreign policy status quo that exists at the moment is what they want. But if they do, they will at least go into it with their eyes open and know that they're in for an extended period of war, a tremendously bloody and costly war, in a war that, no matter what the president says, is coming to our shores. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you, Michael. I'm a strong believer that ideas have consequences, and ideas are more powerful than politicians. And I wish that the politicians would deal more in ideas and read more, so I'm giving Mr. Giuliani a reading assignment. This is what I expect him to read before the next debate. The first, of course, is Michael's book, Imperial Hubris. And he used to know this man called Anonymous. So, but now his name is out there in front because he's in the academic world now. And also another very important book that I refer to quite frequently, and anybody who wants to understand our foreign policy and want to understand the whole issue of the problems that we have, is written by Robert Pape, Dying to Win. He is the expert on why people commit suicide terrorism, why there were 19 individuals willing to do that. And I started reading this book as a total skeptic because I was convinced it had to do only with radical Islam. Read it and you might be converted as well. It has to do with something else, and he calls it occupation. And also Chalmers Johnson has written an interesting book. And this, to me, is amazing that somebody like Mr. Giuliani has never heard of such an explanation. And here it is, blowback. And the CIA has written about that. I'd be interested, maybe Michael can tell us later, just how many years ago the term was coined. And I don't think Chalmers Johnson coined the word. I suspect that the CIA probably did, because there are unintended consequences that come back to haunt us. And of course, 1953 on, there's been a lot of problems. But then the other one, since Mr. Giuliani is the expert on 9/11 and talks about it and gets paid to talk about it, I think he ought to read this. And there are some pretty good quotes in there that defends my position. Now we're open for questions.